In Argentina, the electoral ban begins so that citizens can think about who they are going to elect as president of the country next Sunday. In Panama, President Laurentino Cortizo informed the nation that the executive has already received a first payment for the mining contract. And in Palestine, Gaza faces the threat of starvation and disease after 8 deliveries were halted by a lack of fuel and a communications blackout, humanitarian agencies have warned. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Argentina, the electoral ban begins so that citizens can think about who they are going to elect as president of the country next Sunday. The authorities announced that the campaigns and advertisements of the presidential candidates of Union for the Homeland, Sergio Massa, and for Liberty Advances, Javier Milei, have ended. During this period, the candidates will not be allowed to make public appearances, proselytize, publish surveys, or pre-election polls. The sale of alcoholic beverages is also prohibited from November 20th. Candidates who do not comply with the Electoral Code will be subject to sanctions such as imprisonment for 2 months to 2 years and will lose the right to receive contributions, subsidies, and annual public financing. The political and institutional crisis affecting Guatemala has escalated in the last hours. A series of arrests and raids have been followed by the announcement of the prosecutor's office, which would pave the way to a possible arrest of the elected presidential binomial. Prosecutor Angel Saulo Sanchez announced to request the immunities withdrawal of President-elect Bernardo Arevalo, Vice President Karim Errara, and several parliamentarians of the SID movement. They are accused of having seized the University of San Carlos, and on social media they are pointed as the leaders of violent actions. Several students and professors were detained by order of the prosecutor's office. The elected officials responded to the serious accusations.
Yes, there is no longer any doubt that they are forging an authoritarian regression in Guatemala. They have announced absolutely illegal measures to intimidate the democratically elected vice president and president. Measures that also target sitting legislators and that show the desperation and ambition of this small group.
The president-elect also made an urgent appeal to the international community in light of the grave events of the past few hours.
They have decided to take this path, and today we warn the international community committed to freedom not to turn a blind eye to this authoritarian process. Democracy in Guatemala is endangered, but it will not let these actions prevent the new spring from beginning on January 14th.
In Panama, President Laurentino Cortizo informed the nation that the executive has already received a first payment for the mining contract. The organizations reacted to his announcements. The head of state promised that his office would abide by the decision of the highest court of justice on the constitutionality of the mining contract. However, the executive announced it had already received from the Canadian company $564,840,543 that will be placed in a restricted account of the National Bank of Panama. The payment corresponds to the period that goes from December 2021 to October 2023. According to the contract established by Law 406 last month, which sparked the social outcry rejecting the mining exploitation. The unions and social organizations expressed their rejection to the presidential announcements and promised to stay on the streets.
And we must deeply regret these speeches by Mr. Cortizo here, who disrespected the Constitution and the law. Was you and your cabinet. It was the Assembly of Deputies that approved a law against the will of the sovereign. It was the Supreme Court of Justice, which took 20 years to give a ruling, but after it gave it, 2017 until today, never enforced the ruling. The questioning of the powers of the state is no whim of the people. It is because you don't comply with the Constitution and the law.
Saul Mendes, Secretary General of the National Union of Construction and Similar Industries, also responded to the warnings issued by the executive branch and other Panamanian government agencies regarding the mobilizations.
The threat of judicialization of such a protest, we are also going to defend ourselves from it. Here what we have demanded is respect for national sovereignty, self-determination and the dignity solely by you in your government for preferring the dollars from the mine to the country.
On Thursday, photo reporter Ismael Villagomez was murdered in northeastern Mexico. This has been the fifth record of a journalist killed in 2023. Villagomez worked at El Heraldo de Juarez, and the Secretary of Public Security of Chihuahua, Jorge Armendariz, revealed the reporter's corpse was found in his car in the early morning. The journalist had a part-time job as car driver. Therefore, it is not clear his murder is connected to his journalistic activities. Police inquiries unfolded he received a bullet on his nut. The Committee to Protect Journalists made a call to Mexican authorities to thoroughly investigate the murder. On Thursday, in the United States, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum on the U.S. West Coast. In what international media highlighted as the first direct talks in a year, the leaders of Asia's two largest economies discussed issues such as China's ban on Japanese seafood and military activities in regional seas. In the meantime, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida committed to maintain mutually beneficial relations. For his part, Chinese leaders said their countries should focus on common interests and reaffirm their mutually beneficial strategic relationship and give it a new meaning. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back from the south. Gaza faces the threat of starvation and disease after aid deliveries were halted by a lack of fuel and communication blackout, humanitarian agencies have warned. Aid deliveries into the enclave have been suspended again as Israel continues to restrict fuel supplies. The United Nations World Food Programme said on Friday that civilians face the immediate possibility of starvation. Furthermore, Palestinian telecommunications companies Jawal and Paltel said on Thursday that their networks went out of service after they ran out of fuel. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization said it was very worried about the spread of disease in Gaza, citing more than 17,000 reported cases of acute respiratory infections and at least 44,000 cases of diarrhea. In Gaza, Israel's war against the health center seems unstoppable. While holding almost 5,000 hostages in the largest hospital in Gaza, the Al-Shifa, it now begins a new siege in the Ibn Sina hospital in Jenin. This is the second time that the Zionist forces attacked this health center. The argument remains the same as the one they have used in past attacks to other health centers. They claim to be looking for Hamas tunnels and command posts. The results has also been the same. The IDF have still not been able to fabricate solid evidence that certifies the use of these facilities by Hamas as a command post or hiding place for hostages. The General Director of the Ministry of Health in Jenin confirmed that the assault of the genocidal troops claimed the lives of 2 Palestinian citizens. 2 homes east of Khan Yunis were hit by Israeli strikes last Thursday and early Friday. The attack late Thursday killed 11 members of a family that had fled the main combat zone in Gaza City. On Friday, 35 people were killed in Khan Yunis and Rafah, which is farther south, said Mohammed Sakud, an official with the Health Ministry of Gaza. Dead and wounded from Friday's strike, including babies and young children, were brought to the hospital. Over 1.5 million people in Gaza are estimated to be internally displaced, including about 778,000 internally displaced people who are staying in at least 154 UNRWA shelters. Jordan confirmed on Thursday that it will not close the energy and water exchange agreement with Israel due to the Zionist operation against the Gaza Strip. Ayman al-Safadi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Jordan, reported that an agreement to exchange solar energy for desalinated water will not be signed. The agreement should be carried out in the month of October, but al-Safadi pointed out that no minister in Jordan can sit next to an Israeli minister to sign an agreement while they are killing civil population in Gaza. The Minister of Foreign Affairs went further and assured that they will not hesitate to definitely cancel the Israeli-Jordan agreement and do everything that is in their hands to help their Gazati brothers. On Friday, the Israeli Institute of Security Studies reported that since the beginning of the siege against the Gaza Strip, only 5% of worldwide demonstrations support their country. The study details that 95% of the world marches held since October 7th have been in favor of Palestine. Demonstrations have developed all over the planet, and it is worth to note that countries like Yemen organized 486 mobilizations to reject the actions of the Zionist regime. The report also shows that the United States stands out as second in the world ranking of pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Global demonstrations call for a ceasefire, respect for hospitals, schools, the lives of women, children, civilians in general, humanitarian workers, and journalists. The UN Security Council approved a resolution aimed at stabilizing temporary ceasefires and extended humanitarian corridors throughout the Gaza Strip, a decision that the Zionist occupation entity, in a blatant violation of international law, announced that it would not comply with and that it will continue its war against the Palestinian enclave. Our correspondent Hisham Wanus with the story.
The draft, prepared by Malta, received 12 votes in favor, none against, and 3 abstentions from Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. A document that Palestinian permanent representative to the United Nations criticized as it focuses on the immediate release of all Israeli hostages and the urgent and expanded creation of humanitarian process and corridors without calling for a permanent ceasefire, condemning the brutal Israeli bombardment, or urging the immediate release of thousands of Palestinian prisoners in jails in the occupied territories.
This resolution shows that the so-called world community does not exist, and neither does the United Nations organizations, and there is not even the human rights, because this decision does not condemn the Israeli massacres against our brothers in Gaza, made us lose faith in the whole world, in the light after the slaughter that slips the blood of our fellow countrymen, knowing that no one in the world could act and take strong decision to stop the shedding of Palestinian blood in occupied Palestine.
In rejection of this resolution, the occupation troops continue their indiscriminate bombardment of Gaza, even assaulting for the second time in less than 24 hours the Al-Shifa Health Complex, where in addition to destroying several sections and medical equipment, they killed 30 patients, including 3 premature babies, and detained 200 people. A blatant violation of international law and a war crime, whose perpetrators, the Palestinians and their allies in the resistance bloc, demand must be tried and punished by the International Criminal Court.
The Zionist occupying entity is an aggressive and usurping body, and it is imperative that all law-abiding people, both in Syria and throughout the Arab world, pursue this entity before the relevant courts, in particular the International Criminal Court, to prosecute and penalize it for immoral and inhuman violation of all international laws, norms and resolutions with the massacres it commits in occupied Palestine, particularly in Gaza.
Meanwhile, the so-called world community remains incapable of stopping the Israeli war of extermination against Gaza, a resounding failure of humanity in Palestine, denounced the Palestinians, who, in order to thwart Zionist plans to displace them from their lands by force, in addition to sticking to resistance, urged the world to press for the United Nations Security Council resolutions not to remain only on paper.
Hisham Wanus, teleSUR, Oriente Medio.
We have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at teleSUR English. There you'll be able to rewatch our interviews, top stories, special broadcastings, and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. A fun short break. Don't go away. Welcome back from the south. The leader of the Socialist Workers' Party, Pedro Sanchez, was sworn in as president of the government on Friday at the Zarzuela Palace in front of the King of Spain, Philip VI. After being re-elected by Congress of Deputies with an absolute majority during the investiture session with 179 votes in his favor, he took the sworn oath of office before the monarch in accordance with Spanish law. The ceremony, held in the audience hall in front of a copy of the Constitution, was attended by the President of the Senate, Pedro Royan, the President of Congress, Francina Armengol, and the Minister of Justice, Pilar Llop. Now the Socialist President must announce the members of his new cabinet of government. In Belgium, an international tribunal that for 2 days in Brussels analyzed the U.S. blockade against Cuba ruled on Friday that this policy violates international law and universal norms for peaceful coexistence. After hearing the arguments of the prosecutor's office and the testimony of witnesses on the human and economic damage of the blockade, the tribunal recalled that the United States has been applying this unilateral system of coercive measures for more than 60 years, affecting the living conditions of an entire people, its development, and the performance of the various sectors of society. The decision of the judges also reflects the extraterritorial scope of the blockade, a component contrary to international law, and its intensification with the inclusion of the island on the list of alleged sponsors of terrorism. The opinion read by the judges, headed by the German jurist Norman Pisch, also pointed out that the blockade violates the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights of 1966.
The General Assembly of the United States gives us some hope. But in this parliament, in Europe, we have to keep on working. We will fight it from different groups, adding as we are doing, denouncing the effects of the European extraterritoriality, not only in people, but in companies, in organizations like the European Solidarity Organizations that cannot exercise a direct solidarity because of this systematic blockade also in the financial matters.
Cuba deserves all the support it needs. The government or some government can be meant, but let them know that Cuba is not alone, that the people of the world are with you, that you share life, share love, share culture, history, solidarity, and that we will not fail, that we will be with your side by side until victory always.
The International Tribunal urged the United States to put an end to the blockade against Cuba and to compensate the companies and citizens affected. The solidarity group, Bridges of Love, was present.
We come to this court against the blockade to denounce a crime committed against the Cuban people. That massive crime, that genocide, is the United States blockade. We represent Bridges of Love, a movement made of Cubans and non-Cubans around the world. We are people of diverse creeds and ideologies, united in the desire to put an end to the United States economic war against Cuba. Our movement brings together people from civil society who believe that the blockade of Cuba is indecent, immoral, and inhumane, and for that reason, it must be lifted.
The hearing on the reinstatement of imprisoned opposition leader Ousmane Sonko to the electoral roll for the 2024 presidential elections began this Friday in Senegal at the Dakar Supreme Court. The 49-year-old politician was arrested on July 28th and faces charges of planning an insurrection, undermining state security, and criminal association with a terrorist organization. Sonko secured the third position in the country's 2019 presidential elections and enjoys significant popularity. Malik Diaye, press officer of Sonko's opposition party, stated that Sonko remains one of the favored candidates for 2024 elections, arbitrarily detained and deprived of his rights by his political opponents. Sonko supporters claim that the criminal charges against him since 2021 are part of an orchestrated campaign to hinder his political aspirations ahead of the presidential elections in February. A strong earthquake of magnitude 6.7 struck the southern Philippines on Friday, the U.S. Geological Survey reported. The impact of the earthquake caused the evacuation of buildings and the collapse of part of the roof of a shopping mall in the city of General Santos. less than 100 kilometers from the epicenter of the quake. The ground motion occurred off the province of Sarangani on the main southern island of Mindanao at a depth of 78 kilometers and was felt over a wide area of the mountains island. Earthquakes are a recurring phenomenon in the Philippines, located along the Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc of intense seismic and volcanic activity that extends from Japan through Southeast Asia to the Pacific Basin. In Ecuador, an astounding new species of orchid was discovered in the Toisan mountain range, which has not only been an important scientific discovery, but also a beacon of hope for the rich biodiversity of the Andes. Researchers from the Ecominga Foundation say they've discovered a new native species, the Lepanthes inas manzanoaea, discovered in the Manduriciu River Reserve in the Toisan Range. This new species was named after Ines Manzano, an Ecuadorian environmental activist and lawyer who worked and contributed to environmental laws and climate action in Ecuador. Ecominga Foundation researcher Marco Monteros and his team presented their findings to Ecuador's National Biodiversity Institute. Lepanthes is one of the richest species with the subtribe Pleurothalidae, with more than 1,180 species distributed throughout the neotropics. Ecuador has more than 350 species of native Lepanthes, and the number is increasing every year. The health situation in Gaza worsens 1 month after the beginning of the Israeli siege on the Strip. Let's take a look at the reality of the Palestinian people in this context. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. Before saying goodbye, we want to thank our Caribbean audience, especially the audience of Trinidad and Tobago. We are pleased to share our newscasts and contribute to provide an alternative news source of the latest world events. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on our social media on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For Telesur English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.